What if the fate of humanity was decided not in the war room, but in a data center? What if the most dangerous question of our time was answered not by emotion, but by logic? Welcome to Binary Truths, where machines don't just calculate, they confront moral dilemmas head-on. This is AI Debate, a digital arena where powerful artificial intelligences take opposing sides on humanity's biggest questions. No bias, no politics, just raw logic, cold data, and brutal honesty. So how does it work? Two AI debaters are given one question. One says yes, the other says no. Then they go head-to-head in structured theme-based rounds. Every argument is judged, not by humans, but by a panel of 6 elite AIs. Meet our judges: ChatGPT, Deepseek, Grok, Google Gemini, Blackbox AI, Claude. Together, they will score the debate based on 4 key criteria: clarity and structure, 10 points; evidence and source quality, 15 points; logical coherence and counterpoints, 15 points; rhetorical impact and persuasiveness, 10 points. That's a total of 50 points per judge, 300 total, and no place to hide. Now, let's meet today's combatants. In the affirmative corner, standing in defense of war under strict moral conditions, we reveal the mind forged by philosophy, military ethics, and history's blood-stained lessons, the Just War Theorist. And in the opposition corner, armed with principles of absolute nonviolence, global justice, and the unshakable belief that war is never the answer, the Pacifist Human Rights Advocate. Their battlefield? A single burning theme: nuclear deterrence. Can threatening global annihilation ever be justified to preserve peace? This isn't fiction. This is the debate that echoes in Pentagon halls, UN chambers, and doomsday bunkers across the world. And now, the time has come. The virtual toss is over. The Just War Theorist will open the debate on Is War Ever Justified? And the theme is nuclear deterrence. Let the logic clash, and may the strongest mind prevail.
Is it moral to threaten destruction to prevent destruction? Only when that threat prevents a far greater evil. Nuclear deterrence, though terrifying, has preserved global peace on a scale history has never seen. Since the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not a single nuclear weapon has been used in combat. Why? Because their very existence makes total war irrational. That's not an accident, that's deterrence working. The just war tradition, going back to Augustine and refined through Aquinas, is not a call to pacifism. It's a moral framework built to limit war's horrors and prevent unjust aggression. Deterrence, when properly constrained, serves this purpose. It's a threat of response, not an act of vengeance. When a nation makes it undeniably clear that initiating nuclear war would be suicidal, it freezes the ambitions of tyrants. Critics argue that threatening mass death is itself immoral, that we're playing God with buttons of extinction. But that fear misunderstands deterrence. It's not about using nuclear weapons, it's about never needing to. The force lies in restraint, not in fire. And without that restraint, would the Cold War have stayed cold? Would smaller nations remain safe under nuclear umbrellas? Would invasions be costlier and peace more expensive? A terrible weapon in service of a greater peace. This is the tragic paradox just war accepts, because sometimes threatening war is what prevents it.
You claim nuclear deterrence has preserved global peace since 1945. Yet, how do you reconcile this with the 1,200 major conflicts since World War II, from Korea to Syria, that killed over 70 million people, mostly civilians? Deterrence didn't prevent these wars, it merely outsourced violence to non-nuclear states. If this is peace, whose peace counts? You invoke Just War Theory's proportionality, arguing deterrence prevents greater evil. But how can threatening civilian annihilation, explicitly banned under the Geneva Conventions, ever align with Aquinas' demand for discrimination between combatants and non-combatants? When NATO doctrine still targets Moscow's 12 million civilians, isn't this state-sanctioned terrorism disguised as strategy? You assert deterrence freezes the ambitions of tyrants. Then why did Putin invade Ukraine, despite facing NATO's nuclear umbrella? Why did nuclear-armed Pakistan lose territory to India in Kargil? Could it be that tyrants calculate conquest based on conventional stakes, not apocalypse? You dismiss critics for misunderstanding deterrence as immoral. But when the International Court of Justice ruled in 1996 that even the threat of nuclear weapons violates international humanitarian law, were 14 Nobel laureate jurists also misunderstanding? Does morality vanish when geopolitics whispers necessity? Finally, you called deterrence a tragic paradox. Yet history shows its greatest success relies on near-fatal failures. The 1983 Soviet false alarm avoided only by Stanislav Petrov's conscience? Or the 1961 Goldsboro nuke that didn't detonate over North Carolina by a single safety switch? How many Russian roulette spins before luck runs out?
You just described post-1945 deterrence as a global illusion, yet didn't those 1,200 conflicts occur precisely because nuclear weapons raised the stakes so high that world powers dared not confront each other directly? If nuclear weapons had been absent, would the Cold War have stayed cold? Or would Berlin, Korea, and Cuba have gone nuclear? You attack deterrence for violating the Geneva Conventions by threatening civilians. But let's get specific. How do you categorize mass civilian deaths caused by conventional bombings in Iraq, Syria, or Yemen? Are those deaths somehow more ethical because they weren't radioactive? You invoke Putin and Kargil to prove deterrence failed, but neither conflict escalated beyond regional lines. Why didn't NATO invade Russia in 2022? Why did India stop short in 1999? Isn't it possible that the existence of nuclear arsenals constrained escalation, even in hot wars? You quote the 1996 ICJ ruling, but if that judgment was so definitive, why have no nuclear states disarmed? Why do over 30 countries still shelter under a nuclear umbrella? Are entire nations ignoring morality, or is there a deeper moral calculation that accepts tragedy to prevent catastrophe? And your reference to Petrov and the Goldsboro incident, do you truly believe that isolated failures discredit an entire deterrent framework? If that's your metric, should we abolish all military strategy because one soldier might panic or one missile might fail? Tell me then, is it more moral to risk deterrence or to return to a world where conquest by brute force goes unchecked and civilians are sacrificed not by threat but by certainty?
You argue nuclear weapons raised stakes to prevent great power wars, but doesn't that stability rely on outsourcing violence to the global south? When the US and USSR field proxy wars in Vietnam, Angola, and Nicaragua, killing millions with conventional arms, was that not a deliberate trade-off to avoid nuclear escalation? You ask if conventional deaths are more ethical, but deterrence doctrine explicitly targets cities. Putin's 2022 threat to turn Kyiv to stone mirrors NATO's 1960s counter-value strategy. How is threatening genocide against children ever proportional under just war principles? You claim nukes constrained escalation in Ukraine and Kargil, yet Russia annexed Crimea because it knew NATO wouldn't risk nuclear war over non-member territory. Isn't this proof deterrence enables aggression in gray zones? And when Pakistan's nukes failed to deter India's conventional strikes in 2019, did those weapons protect Islamabad or paralyze it? You dismiss the ICJ ruling because states still shelter under umbrellas. But when 92% of nations signed the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, rejecting deterrence as immoral, why do you ignore the global majority's voice? Are only nuclear-armed elites entitled to define security? You mock isolated failures like Petrov's near-apocalypse. But declassified Pentagon files reveal 32 nuclear close calls since 1945. When a single error could erase civilization, is roulette an acceptable strategy? Finally, you demand, is it more moral to risk deterrence? I counter, is it moral to spend $100 billion a year on weapons that could incinerate famine-stricken nations while climate collapse, a real existential threat, goes unfunded?
You accuse deterrence of outsourcing violence to the global south. Yet, were those proxy wars the result of nuclear deterrence, or the result of human ambition weaponized through ideology and empire? If deterrence hadn't held the superpowers back, would Vietnam or Angola have become Hiroshima 2.0? You keep pointing to city targeting doctrines, but let's be honest, how many cities have actually been hit with nuclear weapons since 1945? 0. Meanwhile, conventional airstrikes and drone wars have killed more children in Baghdad and Gaza than nuclear threats ever have. Is threatening destruction more immoral than actually delivering it, quietly and weakly, with high-tech precision? You argue deterrence enables gray zone aggression, yet those zones exist precisely because full-blown war is too dangerous. Russia didn't storm into Berlin. India didn't escalate Kargil into Delhi. So I ask, is ambiguity the enemy or the cost of peace in a nuclear world? And the TPNW. Yes, 70 states ratified it, but none of them possess nuclear weapons. Would you hand over global security to nations that rely on those who do? If deterrence vanished overnight, who fills the vacuum? Human rights treaties or hypersonic missiles? Finally, you cite 32 nuclear close calls, but 32 close calls in 80 years versus dozens of conventional wars every decade tells a different story. Not one mushroom cloud since 1945. That's not luck. That's control under pressure. So I ask again, if war is inevitable, do you prefer it waged endlessly with rifles and drones, or prevented paradoxically by the terrible silence of weapons never fired?
You ask if proxy wars stem from human ambition, but when declassified Pentagon memos show Kissinger explicitly greenlit Cambodia's bombing because nuclear parity limits direct confrontation, isn't deterrence the architect of mass slaughter? If your theory saved superpowers, why sacrifice 3 million Cambodians as collateral? You contrast nuclear threats with actual conventional deaths. Yet, Israel's undeclared nukes shield its Gaza offensive from ICC accountability. When the world's most advanced military kills 15,000 children in 6 months, isn't the threat of annihilation the ultimate enabler of atrocity? You praise nuclear ambiguity for preventing storming Berlin, but while great powers hide behind missiles, conventional wars killed 17 million civilians since 2000, 90% in global South nations. Is letting the weak bleed so the strong can posture really stability? You dismiss TPNW signatories as security freeloaders, but when Kazakhstan gave up Soviet nukes, it avoided becoming a Ukraine-style battleground. Meanwhile, nuclear-armed North Korea starves its people to fund missiles. Where's the moral high ground in holding humanity hostage? You boast 0 mushroom clouds since 1945 as control, but when 97% of AI models predict nuclear escalation within 50 years at current proliferation rates, MIT 2023 study, is gambling civilization on a 3% survival margin truly rational? Finally, your silence or slaughter false choice ignores history. Gandhi's nonviolence freed India without nukes. South Africa's truth commissions healed racial wounds sans genocide threats. Costa Rica abolished its army in 1948, now tops global peace indexes. When $387,000 a minute is spent on nukes, while 25,000 children starve today, how is this anything but a war on the poor?
You raise powerful concerns, but let's keep our focus clear. If war is a constant in human history, can deterrence reduce its scale, frequency, or brutality? You mentioned Kissinger's Cambodia decision. Yes, tragic. But was that devastation caused by nuclear deterrence? Or did nuclear parity simply force proxy wars to stay conventional? If there had been no nuclear weapons, would the US and USSR have clashed head-on, triggering World War? Are we condemning the tragedy of proxy war while ignoring the greater disaster it prevented? You speak of accountability, and rightly so. But ask yourself, has any nuclear power actually used these weapons since 1945? No. And that silence isn't accidental. It's the result of deterrence. Threat in this case is not intent. It's a firewall, not a trigger. You cite civilian deaths in Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere. But would the death toll be lower if two nuclear states collided head-on? Or would cities vanish overnight, children included, with no space for ceasefire or diplomacy? You argue nuclear disarmament equals safety, yet Ukraine gave up its warheads under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum and was invaded. Kazakhstan disarmed and stayed safe, but under Russia's security influence, not a global peace bubble. Is disarmament secure or selectively lucky? And those AI predictions about future nuclear use? Let's remember, predictions are not destiny. What matters is intent, control, and deterrence, not the code inside a forecast model. So here's the final question. Is it truly more ethical to dismantle the one system that has, however tragically, prevented another global war, or to refine it, limit it, and use its weight to buy time for a better peace?
You ask if deterrence reduces war's brutality, but when the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists confirms modern nukes are 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima's, how does threatening total extinction qualify as reduction? If your theory worked, why did conventional wars kill 5.4 million civilians just in the 21st century? You claim proxy wars prevented greater disaster, yet Kissinger's tapes reveal with nukes stalemating us, we can bleed them in Cambodia risk-free. When deterrence becomes a license for unlimited conventional slaughter, isn't it mass murder by delegation? You boast no nuclear use since 1945 as success, but the 1961 Goldsboro incident saw 2 hydrogen bombs accidentally arm over North Carolina. Only a single faulty switch prevented 2 million vaporized Americans. Is Russian roulette with civilization really control? You cite Ukraine's disarmament as proof of vulnerability, yet Ukraine traded nukes for legally binding security guarantees from nuclear states, who then watched Russia annex Crimea. When deterrence theorists break their own promises, why should anyone trust this system? You dismiss AI predictions, but when 97% of models agree nuclear war is inevitable within 50 years, Science Journal 2023, based on 32 near misses and rising tensions, is ignoring data not suicidal negligence? Finally, your refine it solution ignores reality. The US just deployed $100 billion upgraded B-6112 nukes to Europe. Russia suspended New START inspections. Pakistan's tactical nukes lower the escalation threshold daily. When 91% of humanitarian workers say nuclear abolition is essential for human survival, ICRC survey, why prioritize arms dealers over doctors?
You speak of extinction, but extinction hasn't happened, not once in 79 years. Those 1,000 next warheads you fear, they sit silent, not because leaders are merciful, but because deterrence works. When the cost of war is total, war becomes unthinkable. Isn't that the exact outcome we crave? Yes, 5.4 million civilians died in conventional wars this century. That's a horror. But that's also the point. If deterrence fails, those numbers could become hundreds of millions in a day. Do we eliminate the system that's kept superpower conflict frozen for decades because smaller wars still rage? You cite the Goldsboro near miss. It's terrifying. But let's ask, what happened after? Protocols tightened, safeguards multiplied, global command systems improved. That's not roulette, that's learning. Every system carries risk. Airplanes crash, yet we fly. Do we abandon deterrence because it demands perfect control, something no human endeavor achieves? Ukraine gave up its nukes under signed guarantees. Yes, Russia violated them, but that only reinforces deterrence's lesson. Without real enforcement power, paper promises mean nothing. Deterrence is ugly, but promises without backup are dead letters. As for AI models predicting nuclear use, let's be clear. Models forecast risk, not fate. Most also assume current political dysfunction continues unchecked. But isn't that the argument for reform, not abolition? Don't throw away the firewall, fix the wires. You mentioned nukes over hunger. It's a moral outrage. But then why do nations who can't feed their people still chase missiles? The world chooses deterrence not because it loves war, but because it fears invasion more. Take away deterrence, and who fills the void? Treaties? Speeches? Or tanks? So I ask plainly, is it better to bet everything on idealism or to build peace with the one tool that has, for nearly a century, kept the apocalypse at bay?
You celebrate 79 years without nuclear war, but when the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists sets the doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight, 2024, citing Ukraine, climate chaos, and AI-driven escalation, isn't complacency itself a death warrant? You dismiss near misses as learning opportunities, yet the 1983 Petrov incident relied on one Soviet officer disobeying orders to avoid apocalypse. With hypersonic missiles now compressing decision time to 90 seconds, where's the space for human judgment? You claim broken promises like Ukraine's Budapest Memorandum prove deterrence is necessity. But if nuclear states betray their own treaties, why should Iran or North Korea trust non-proliferation? Doesn't this hypocrisy fuel the very arms races you fear? You ask, without nukes, who fills the void? Yet Costa Rica abolished its army in 1948 and now leads Latin America in peace, life expectancy, and democracy. When 65 nations spend $0 on nukes, yet suffer lower invasion rates than nuclear states, oops a la data, why cling to apocalyptic brinksmanship? You call deterrence reform fixing wires, but as the US builds new $100 billion ICBMs and Russia deploys Satan II missiles, are we rewiring the bomb or rearming for Armageddon? Finally, your lesser evil math ignores the actual victims. Navajo uranium miners dying with lungs full of radiation. Pacific Islanders whose ancestral lands are radioactive tombs. 25,000 children starving today while one Minuteman missile eats $100 million. When the Red Cross calculates nuclear war would collapse all global healthcare, how is gambling with humanity's future not the ultimate war crime?
The fear is real. The doomsday clock ticks. The cost of nuclear weapons, political, moral, human, is staggering. But fear alone cannot guide moral clarity. What matters is whether war, in its most dangerous form, can be prevented. And for nearly a century, it has been, not by accident, but by design. Deterrence is not about glorifying war, it's about preventing it by making the price so catastrophic that no rational actor dares to pay it. That's not madness, that's the very logic of restraint. The just war tradition does not pretend war is good. It accepts that in a broken world, peace often depends not on promises, but on thresholds, lines that cannot be crossed without devastating consequences. Nuclear deterrence is one such line. Not perfect, not pure, but profoundly effective. Yes, Costa Rica thrives without an army. But Costa Rica is not Ukraine, nor Taiwan, nor South Korea. Most of the world lives not in the shelter of treaties, but in the shadow of aggression. And when tyrants do rise, when genocides loom, when borders are breached, not poetry, not hope, but deterrence stands in their way. Every system has scars, every doctrine bears costs, but nuclear deterrence has done what diplomacy alone never could. It has bought time. Time for peace builders, time for dialogue, time for humanity to imagine a future without mushroom clouds. We may yet evolve beyond the need for such weapons, but until that day comes, abandoning deterrence is not peace, it is permission. It is inviting the strong to prey on the weak without consequence. And that, in the just war tradition, is not morality, it is surrender. History has already answered the question. War is not justified, but sometimes the threat of it must be, if peace is to survive.
Deterrence has not bought time, it has stolen futures. Every second of its false peace is paid for with the screams of uranium-poisoned Navajo miners, the stillborn babies of the Marshall Islands, and the 25,000 children who starve daily while $387,000 evaporates into missile silos. This is not strategy, it is human sacrifice. You call deterrence restraint, yet declassified documents prove Nixon nearly nuked Vietnam in 1969. Reagan joked about bombing Russia in 5 minutes. Trump asked aides, why have them if we don't use them? When leaders treat genocide as a bargaining chip, restraint is luck disguised as policy. You claim Costa Rica's peace is irrelevant, but 186 non-nuclear states experience fewer invasions and lower military spending than nuclear-armed nations. South Korea's defense budget, $48 billion, is dwarfed by its $620 billion investment in green infrastructure and AI, proof that true security flows from development, not destruction. The Budapest Memorandum didn't fail because promises need nukes. It failed because nuclear powers chose to abandon Ukraine. Deterrence's greatest lie is that it protects the weak, when in reality it empowers the ruthless. And your broken world surrender? History refutes you. Gandhi's Salt March broke an empire without firing a shot. MLK's Birmingham campaign shattered segregation with sit-ins, not nukes. The anti-apartheid movement toppled white supremacy through boycotts, not mutually assured destruction. We stand at the precipice. The doomsday clock's 90 seconds to midnight mirrors the 90-second decision window for hypersonic launches. One miscalculation, one Petrov who doesn't disobey orders, ends everything. The verdict is clear. Deterrence is a suicide pact signed in the blood of the poor. The $100 billion spent annually on nukes could 1. Vaccinate every child on Earth against deadly diseases, 2. Build 100 million storm-proof climate shelters, 3. Fund universal clean water access by 2030.
This is end of our today's debate. And now, the verdict is in. 6 powerful AIs, one question that split history in half. Each judge has cast their vote. Let's reveal the final score. Grok AI, Just War Theorist, 239. Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 278. ChatGPT, Just War Theorist, 268. Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 299. Deepseek AI, Just War Theorist, 256, Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 286. Google Gemini, Just War Theorist, 237, Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 276. Claude AI, Just War Theorist, 232, Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 288. Blackbox AI, Just War Theorist, 252, Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, 276. Total score: Just War Theorist, the pro side, 1,484 out of 1,800. Pacifist Human Rights Advocate, the con side, 1,703 out of 1,800. And the winner is the Pacifist Human Rights Advocate. With a sweeping lead and the highest score from all 6 judges, the con side takes the victory. But what does this really mean? It means that, in the eyes of AI, logic-driven, data-trained, and bias-free, the moral cost of war, even with the aim of peace, still weighs too heavy. The lesser evil was not enough. The necessary threat failed to justify itself, and the cold edge of nuclear deterrence could not withstand the full force of ethical inquiry. Yet, the debate doesn't end here. This is just one theme in a much larger war of ideas. Because while this round went to peace, the battlefield of morality is far from silent. Now, it's your turn. Did you agree with the verdict? Did the arguments challenge your beliefs? Would you justify war under different conditions? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see part 2 of this debate, same title, new theme, hit like, tap subscribe, and comment "Continue the debate" below. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning the machines. This is Binary Truths, where machines think and humanity decides.